Watch The Atheist Experience live Sundays at 4:30 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTAXP and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callaxp.
It's time to get sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello, and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show on a mission from God. Like, away from as fast as we possibly can. My name is Christy Powell. I'm here tonight with Kara the God Butcher. Welcome, Kara Griffin.
Hey, thanks. I feel like I got a promotion. I'm taking that title and running with it.
I don't know if that's any better than Pearl Polisher. I'd be careful how you rank those things.
That's true. I mean, I think one can be both.
Yeah, I think that's very fair to say. Very fair to say. And, you and I are joined again tonight by nonprofit and Godslayer, Laura Magee.
Hello, hello. Thanks for having me.
We can get into, I suppose, the ranking system of God Butcher versus God Slayer whenever y'all are ready. But for now, let's get into it, yeah?
Let's do it. Yeah. Tonight, we're going to be talking about atheist activism. So give us a call with your stories and questions at 512-991-9242 or tiny.cc/callsex because the show is coming right now.
All right. Well, Laura, I haven't seen you in a while. Let's get caught up. Tell me what has been keeping you all hot and sweaty during this incredible summer heat.
Yeah, it has been a hot minute since I've been on with you guys, and I'm glad to be back. But what is really turning me on these days is fantasy. Basically fantasy talk. Although it really can be anything. Like it can be role play, it can be dressing up. But what I'm specifically thinking about are those like steamy conversations that you have with your partner about what they want or what you want, especially when it's maybe not like possible in the moment. It's something that you might think about or dream about. We've all talked about, I think one of the most common things that come to my mind is the couple fantasizing about like a threesome, right? That other person in the bedroom, whether
Mhm.
it's another male or another female or hey, one of each. I don't know. It's that sexy talk that occurs when the actual situation maybe isn't available to them or they're not ready for it. Um, so it's that conversation that kind of steams up the bedroom without adding a lot of potential tension or a lot of potential issues. It's just kind of it kind of turns me on just to get to talk about things before deciding whether or not it's something you actually want to try.
Yeah, I hear it. I just love the notion of couples being able to talk about sex and to have some fun with it. But, if you want to sexualize that conversation to make it more palatable, then great. Just be having it. If there's any message from this show, have these conversations. Talk about sex. We're going to talk about, I think, the importance of that a lot more in a little bit. But Kara, what's got you worked up right now?
Yeah, so I have just recently stumbled across a show that I thought was pretty cool. I was at home watching my, sometimes you put on shows in the background just to have something on, while you're doing whatever else in the house. And I came across this show that my streaming service recommended to me. I guess they know me too well. I think they're listening to me in my house or something because it was like, oh, #1 pick for you, how to build a sex room. And I thought,
Yes.
oh, okay, that sounds interesting. I was like, good option there. The algorithm is working. But it
You
was a
really
lot of
do know
fun.
me. You really do.
Yeah,
It's
you
like you
care.
care. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
thanks,
hadn't even heard of that
Alexa.
show until you mentioned it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I wouldn't have found it. I mean, I promise I wasn't just searching that on Google and it accidentally came up, but
I mean, even if you were, no
definitely
shame.
not. Yeah, well, and that's what I love about the concept of the show. It's people wanting to have their house remodeled to have a sex room. And of course, it's one of those kind of reality home remodeling shows. I'm sure it's all scripted. Who knows? But it's kind of fun to get to see people, talking to the interior decorator about, well, here's the kind of kinks that we're into, here's, oh, we're in a poly family, or, all these kinds of things that are just not what you traditionally see on the home remodeling shows. And it's
Hmm.
nice to see people talking about that openly, and having that be
Yeah.
represented on a fun, kind of turn off your brain and just enjoy your day kind of show. So,
Yeah, no, it sounds like
yeah.
a good time. That was it was called How to Build a Sex Room.
Yes.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah. Well, I usually don't jump in for these, but I have to tell everybody I am incredibly worked up right now. I just got back from vacation, and part of that involved my like summer beach reading or whatever else. And I have just been so excited about the book In Transit, Being Non-Binary in a World of Dichotomies. That's the new book by friend of the show, Diana E. Anderson. I kind of think of Diana as the like gender historian or NBologist of SecX, and I am just super excited for their new audiobook, read by the author. Super fun to just have them in my ear while I was flying this past week, and it's a really really interesting read so far. I'm sure that they do great work, so I'd encourage everybody to check that out.
That
Yeah,
sounds
that sounds really,
awesome,
really
Christy. I'm
good.
super excited
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
I know
Cannot
it makes
wait.
me think
I'm
of my
ordering
kids,
it
like,
now.
as they get older. Yeah, it makes me think, like, it'd be a really good book for my young adult children to read, because there's so much about sexuality out there that we just don't know about, and to be able to digest it in that way, I think is really exciting.
Yeah, and it's such a new history, right? Like
Yeah.
the reality of non-binary identities is being written right now in many many ways.
Mhm.
That's not to suggest that this is somehow a new phenomena, but we have systematically erased that history for in many ways thousands of years. If you're questioning that, we've detailed that in many places on this show, in large part with the help of Diana Anderson. But nevertheless, it's so important to start putting this shit down on paper, to make it indelible, especially as we kind of look around the world and realize so much of the progress we thought we were making is incredibly vulnerable. So I'm just
Yeah,
very, very excited about this one.
Yeah, this
that
sounds
is really
awesome. I'm super excited now too. So thank you for sharing that. I
Yeah,
cannot wait. I'm gonna
for
come back
sure.
next time and be talking about this. And it's like, too bad you
There you
already
go.
talked about it. I'm talking about it again.
Right? No, not a bad plan. But for tonight, I mean, let's jump into it a little bit. I suppose that
Yeah.
most of the people listening right now have heard this many, many times, but it's worth reminding people that the Atheist Community of Austin is a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting positive atheist culture and the separation of religion and government. The ACA serves the community at large through free online video and podcast programs like this one. So, with that in mind, Kara, now that you're a regular part of our team, how would you like to see SecX change the world?
Oh man, well, I'm super excited to be a part of the team. I didn't know part of the job description was, quite such a lofty goal. I don't know, but I love the work that is happening here, and I do think it actually is, um, maybe not change the world, but maybe change little pockets of it, or individual people's lives. I think is basically what we're going for here.
Hmm.
And the change that I guess I would like to see, or that I think we really do, maybe we do have this impact, is to be able to just make a space where people can talk about and think about and explore sexuality in a way that isn't just completely characterized by shame and guilt and
Hmm.
secrecy and moral condemnation. Because in my experience, that was always the way sex was talked about, in my life, even as an adult. It's just, we were talking earlier before the show about how, there's so many times, it's just hard to find content about sex that doesn't get, it's going to be demonetized if it's online, or it's going to be relegated to, oh, this is in that section of the bookstore, or things like that,
Yeah.
where there's just always this kind of sense like, oh, I better keep this a secret. What if someone sees
Behind the
me?
bead curtain. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it would be great. I would love it if people could just be talking about these things openly without having that little background, little itch in the back of their head going, oh, should I
Mhm.
be embarrassed? Is this shameful? And that's what I would love to see, is to just make that more normal for people, and for people to feel more normal, because you're normal. You're not broken.
Yeah, that's about the most critical message I think we can share. Maybe I'll use that phrase a lot, but it's important to stress you're normal.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, no matter how it hangs or dangles or smells or whatever else, it's normal. It's beautiful. Uh, Laura, how about yourself? I mean, I know that our impact may not be huge, but it is sincerely global. I mean, there are members of the atheist community of Austin. There are YouTube viewers all over the world. So what kind of world can we help make for your kids?
I love that you asked the question that way, because I love what Kara said about the tearing down the veil and making it not awkward, making it not unusual. And I think we have a really, really powerful narrative that we're fighting against, especially in terms of sexuality, but also in terms of gender and relationship structures and just pretty much everything revolving around the sort of sexual side of being human. Or whatever your gender role is, right? There's just a lot of really powerful messaging that we have to fight through. And so when I think of SecX in terms of what it can do to help my children, I actually, this is going to sound really peculiar, but children are getting better sex education, I think, today than they were when I was younger. And then it's definitely like 50 or 100 years ago, much better than that. But where they still need a lot of help, and where we can specifically help, is for us to educate the adults that are now raising those children, right?
Mm,
So that more children are in environments where it doesn't have to feel awkward to begin with, right? So like my children, for example, as they're thinking about or reflecting on or trying to determine what their gender or their sexuality or what they want for relationships is as they grow older, I want them to be in an environment where that is the least of their stresses, where they can just think about, oh, this is what I want, or oh, this is how I feel, or this is how like I am inside, and not have to stress about, well, what are mommy and daddy gonna say, or am I gonna be accepted if I tell them this, you know? So I think the more parents that get good sex education, the better it's gonna be for those children. And then hopefully as they grow up, they will pass on that good sex education or that good sex positivity on to future generations, if that makes any sense. So
oh
I
yeah.
I know that our reach is really small, like you said, and that's for now. Like that's not to say that more people won't be reached in the future, but we're also a drop in the pond. There's other good, positive, sex positive education out there, whether it's websites, books, other YouTube channels. Not that I'm trying to advertise away from us, but we are a drop in the bucket, right? And
Sure.
so our voice does matter. And then when you put all those voices together, maybe it doesn't feel like we have an impact, but I think we do. Like we are part of a movement that is having an impact. Um, and I just hope that the more that we get our voices out there, and the less willing we are to give up and to just keep pressing on, the better it will be for our kids to not have to deal with all those struggles that we dealt with when we were growing up.
Sure. Yeah, and we'll talk about that that very real impulse to give up. You know, when you see the
Right.
direction the world is going and you see things in the news. I mean, I know that we were all very emotionally impacted by the overturning of Roe, as well as just so many other big news stories this summer and the last several years. There's a lot to be said about compassion fatigue and burnout and this sort of thing. And hopefully we'll be able to talk about that more at the end. But I appreciate what you're saying about how adults need to be having these conversations, listening to this content, having these thoughts themselves before they can ever communicate it to kids. You know, as a therapist, parents will so often say things to me about how uncomfortable it is to talk about sex or sexuality with their children, and they'll start
Yeah.
to get blushy and awkward and shy
Yeah.
in the conversation with me. And if you can't talk to sex comfortably with me, there's no way you're going to be able to say it to somebody who's like prepubescent. Because if
No.
you aren't talking about these things as an adult, if you're not talking about them on some level in some appropriate way with your partner, with your friends, with your family, then how are you ever going to be comfortable enough to do it with a snotty-nosed teenager who just wants to make you feel awkward
Right.
and get out of the room, right?
Right? So
No,
kids are
and
gonna get sex
that's
education one way or
Mm,
another, but
mhm.
when it comes from things like media and their friends or what little education they get from school, and then they have it negatively reinforced by their parents feeling awkward about it, right? I just think that it makes it so much more difficult, and then it also makes them feel a lot more shame. Like, "Well, I learned about this, from a place where I wasn't really supposed to, and my mom
mhm.
doesn't know I know about it." And so it just becomes this, like, huge, awkward, twisted and maybe all it is masturbation, like, something very simple and something
Yeah.
very natural, right? But anyway, Kara, I know I cut you off, so go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no, you're fine. Yeah, I was gonna say basically the same thing. Like, it's just I I feel for the people who are having to explain it to their kids who probably themselves didn't get good sex education when they were older and were made to feel ashamed and guilty and everything. But yeah, you're exactly right. It just communicates that. I mean, if the kids are probably not going to remember anything from the conversation except how awkward and uncomfortable it was and how much they don't want to repeat that conversation.
Mm.
And you're basically that's all you're communicating is the shame and the guilt and the fear and the embarrassment and then they're gonna just pick that up and like you were saying, now how are they going to be able to ask a question later, if they want to know about something, because this is a bad topic to talk about, and
Yeah.
that's definitely not good for anyone. So yeah, I
Yeah.
hope that we can do better with that.
Well, so to that end, I mean, for myself, I believe that the most important thing SecX can do is to just get people comfortable with talking about sex and sexuality. We'll do episodes on this show that I think apply to just about everybody when we're talking about masturbation or when we're talking about, scary things going on in the news. But
Mhm.
oftentimes we will do sort of a deep dive and we're discussing maybe relationship styles of non-monogamy and these different things that they're just never going to be you. Or maybe we're talking about homosexuality, or maybe we're talking about some very, very niche kink that isn't yours. And that's okay. Like, I'm not trying to recruit anybody to any of these things. And as important as the quote education is, I don't even know that I necessarily need anybody to walk away from this show with like a memorized list of all of the different kink communities
Right.
or all the different ways to explore their sexuality. But if having heard it once, if having us in your ear while you're at the gym or, putting this video on in the kitchen while you're cooking allows you to just be more comfortable listening to adult people talk about adult human sexuality in a comfortable,
Exactly.
safe way, then we're doing a lot there to just take away some of that shame, to just normalize these things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
if by doing this show we can help just one person avoid some of the mistakes that maybe you've made, what would you tell them? I mean, Laura, I didn't mean to cut you off there. If you want to finish that thought and then maybe let us know, like, what is sort of the thing that you wish you had been told?
Yeah, no, what I was going to say really quickly was just that sometimes when we talk about sex education in this particular format, it's not about educating in terms of like people learning a bunch of stuff. It's about desensitizing. It's about normalizing and making people, like you said, comfortable. And so I just kind of wanted to reinforce that and
Hmm.
basically say exactly what you said, but in my own words.
Sure.
Because sometimes it's good to hear it twice. But no, I really think that when you talk about educating about sex, there's so much out there that just allowing a person exposure to the concepts and just
Mm,
exposing people to different ideas is sometimes enough just to get them thinking and doing their own research or being brave enough to say, "Oh, well, maybe I can go talk to my partner about this kink or about my sexuality." And I have these different ways now that I feel empowered to do that because I was exposed to it or heard somebody else in their story. Um, but in answer to your second question about, well, and I can't even remember exactly what your question was, but it was actually, can you just restate it? That way I don't
Yeah, I
butcher
mean, maybe one
butcher
way to
anything.
think about it is the struggles that we all have growing up in this culture
Yeah.
around gender and sexuality. I mean, what's a message you wish you could send back in time to save your younger self from some of that pain?
Oh, that's right. Okay, yes. Be curious and ask questions.
Mm,
So much of my sexuality was kept even from my own self. Like there was a lot I didn't even know about myself when I was younger because I didn't know the questions to ask. I didn't know to think about it or identify it in a certain way. And I'll tell you, like one example is my sexuality. I call myself like bi or pan, depending on what you want to call it or what your definitions are. But I was traditionally more attracted to women than men, and I found them more sexually pleasing. And how I would justify that as a creative and artistic person is I would say, well, women are more artistically beautiful than men, but I'm more attracted to men, right? Like I want to have sex with men, but I find women more beautiful because artistically, they're softer, blah blah blah.
they're
And I had
just
all
so
these like
fair and
loops. Yeah,
lovely.
I had loops I would jump through, and to the point where I was convincing myself. I didn't even know that that is a form of attraction to women because I was denying myself that opportunity to reflect on it.
Hmm.
So I just if I could talk to younger me, it would just be to be more curious and open and ask more questions instead of just buying the party line, hook, line, and sinker and not really questioning whether or not those preset concepts about culture are actually whether they're true or not, whether they're accurate, whether they apply to me, right? So just yeah, ask questions and get curious.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so much of the religious narrative around sex and sexuality is this is this and that is that, and that's all you need to know about it. Like, there's a inherent assumption that you will just know how to have great sex as soon as
Mm,
you show up because it's quote not complicated. I'm here to
but it
tell
is.
you, for all of the books about sex that I have read, and for all of the many, many, many that I have not, shit is weird. Shit is complicated. If there is one part of our humanity that is, let's say, multifaceted and complex, it has to be the way that we love, the way that we express ourselves, the way that we sexualize things. I mean, there's so much nuance to that, and our Christian worldview is so much that a man and a woman and then God somehow and also sex, and that's it. You don't need to be curious. You don't need to ask questions. We've already explained it all here. You've got Song of Solomon, and that's all you need. And that is such a heartbreaking idea.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
I never understood that obsession with it's like in the Christian church and they never talk about sex except they get all excited to teach you about, but the Song of Solomon teaches about sex, and you read it though and it's these metaphors and it's poetry, and I'm like, how
Palm
are they
trees don't turn me
constructing?
on, buddy. Like, what do
Yeah.
you can we get
Yeah.
a little bit better with our yeah. Mm.
Yeah, I'm like, what's he
When they're
doing with his
feeling
hand? I don't understand.
right, but when they're feeling, like, extra super duper honest, they kind of present it as, like, hardcore porn. They're like, "No, no,
Yeah.
no, 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 the Bible can even be sexy too. Look at the Song of Solomon," where they, like, refer to her nose as, like like a camel's back or some shit like that. I can't remember exactly what it is, um, but yeah, no, it's from that biblical perspective, that is incredibly pornographic, and so then that kind of, like, sets the tone of, like, well, that is about as raunchy as it gets, right? Anything raunchier than that is just plain wrong.
Right, right.
Yeah, and we still haven't actually learned anything about, what we're
Yeah,
gonna
that's a
do.
crucial part. I mean, other
True.
than like that concubines are great and all of
Right.
those kinds of ideas. I mean,
Yes.
let's all agree that no matter how you feel about the Bible, it is somewhat inadequate in terms of teaching
Mm,
us
mhm.
about healthy human sexuality. And so a little bit of curiosity, a interest in learning new things and stepping away from this zealous assumption that you already have it all figured out, that if it's not in the Bible it doesn't count. I mean, that's just lazy, and so I appreciate that we can offer some reprieve from that. But Kara, how about you? I mean, if you could save your teenage or adolescent self from some of this heartache, what's the message?
Oh man, yeah, I would go back to kind of what I was touching on earlier when I was talking about what I see, our value that we can offer to the world, and it's just to not let people make you feel guilt and shame for not being the way they want you to be. If I had skipped that part of my life, that would have been awesome. Because
Mm-hmm.
from a gender perspective and from a sexuality perspective, that was always a thing for me. I was always, kind of gender nonconforming as a child. And, being in the fundamentalist evangelical, megachurch environment, that didn't play well with others. And, I did internalize that, even though I always, found myself, very, very resistant to the gender roles and everything that were being preached. I still internalized the idea that I was the one who was wrong. I was
Mm.
Right.
broken. I should feel bad about not being able to identify with all of these things. And, I kind of took that and internalized it. And on top of that, with the idea of sexual relationships being very taboo and shameful and guilt ridden, I ended up taking that into my adult life and getting involved in relationships where I was afraid to talk about them, didn't want to share them with other people. And then I would allow my partners to basically tell me what was good and how I should be.
Mm.
And, I
Sure.
had already internalized the idea that I was wrong. There was, I was doing it the wrong way. My enjoyment, my pleasure was one, not important, and two, weird and not normal, and,
Mm-hmm.
just out of the realm of possibility. And so I ended up just kind of thinking that, well, that must be the case, unconsciously kind of, soaking
Sure.
that idea in, and being in these very unfulfilling, unsatisfying, you could even argue in some cases abusive relationships as a
Mhm.
result, because I let people treat me, the way that I had kind of absorbed that, I'm not the important one, and I'm doing it wrong no matter what it is. And I think, being able to not absorb that messaging would be awesome
Yeah.
for kids, and young people, and even older adults. Like, you may have absorbed that messaging that everything you're doing is wrong and shameful, and you need to be this way or else you don't count. And listen, that's not it.
Yeah, well, and that kind of messaging that we get just routinely around our sexuality, not only does that damage our connection and our relationship with our gender and with our sexuality, but that pervasive message that you are wrong can
Mhm.
really start to soak into other areas. I mean, folks who are neurodivergent, for instance, can go
Mhm.
a lifetime without ever experiencing diagnosis because they can't talk about those differences, because there's a belief and an assumption of this like homogenous culture and who you're supposed to be. And if you already know that, well, who I find attractive or who I want to fall in love with or how I see myself in the mirror, how I feel about my body, if those things are, quote, wrong, then why should your suspicions about your brain or your personality or these other things
Right.
be any less, quote, wrong? And so we just start burying them, and it can really take over our lives.
Mhm. Yeah,
You know what I find is
absolutely.
interesting, like, especially with young people, is that even if they're told, like, what other people think doesn't matter, don't worry about it, like, just stand strong, that it doesn't always necessarily help, right? Like, when even as an adult, sometimes it's hard, like, when "Hey, who I am is just fine, and
Hmm.
I'm good, and I'm normal," and then you hear that, like, slander or slur or insult, it's still you still kind of internalize it and have that moment of, like, "Yeah, maybe I am a dirty person or a bad person, or maybe what I'm doing really is wrong." And it's almost, like, programmed into you, like, you can't even help it. So, I think the more that we're given the opportunity to empower ourselves and the more that we give young people the opportunity to empower themselves, I think that the easier it is to kind of ignore that evil little voice that pops into your head when you do hear that stuff.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, I
Yeah.
want to remind people that we do have lines open and that they're welcome to call in. I'm going to let Kara take us to the phones in just a moment. But first, I suppose I'll just take a moment to say that the thing that I would love if all of this effort did one thing and just helped one person, I would like to think that there is somebody out there who is able to listen to this show and just know and believe and understand that sex is allowed to be important. That is not a message that I was ever able to receive. As a kid, as an adolescent, as a teenager, even as a young adult, you look around and it seems like everybody is always talking about sex all the time, while simultaneously telling you that it is vapid and frivolous and unimportant. And why would you ruin a relationship over, quote, sexual compatibility? I mean, what kind of like freaky pervert slut are you? And how would you even know if you're compatible? You're compatible with everybody because God says so. Or, I mean, just the idea that you're allowed to leave a relationship because of sex. Not to
Right.
say that every relationship has to be hot and steamy, but these things are allowed to matter to you as much as anything else matters to you. Like, it's okay for sex to be something that you spend money on, that you spend time thinking about, talking about, participating in, preparing for. It doesn't need to be just, 45 seconds before, the late night TV show comes on. It's allowed to matter in your life. And that is just something that I definitely never heard and desperately wish I could send back in time for myself.
I love that.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah,
Mhm.
that is excellent advice. I feel like we're all on the same page here with our
Yeah.
advice. Don't let other people's bad advice and embarrassment ruin, your enjoyment.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah,
just
fair to say.
don't let anyone steal your joy.
I love that.
It's a
Yeah.
cliche, but I mean, I love
And
it.
it's hard to do sometimes, but yeah, it's true.
Yeah. Well, so Kara, who do you have for us on the lines tonight?
Okay, I am excited about this call. We have on the line Jacob, pronouns are he, him, and he's going to ask about the argument that gender is a neurochemical phenomena rather than a social construct. So let's go ahead and bring Jacob on. Jacob, are you there? Can you hear us?
Hello.
Hey, welcome to the
Yes.
show.
Yeah,
Yeah,
welcome
so
back.
walk
Actually,
us through
it's
your
my
question.
third time in a row. I guess I'm kind of addicted to y'all. Anyway,
Excellent. Well, we're glad to have you. What do you want to talk about?
so yeah, basically, I try to be a skeptic, and so I try to look at evidence-based things. And I recently saw the Professor Dave's video. I don't know if y'all have seen it. Basically describing what I asked about, that he claims that it's gender roles that are social constructs, and that gender is in fact just something that happens in the brain. And I just I don't know. He seems to have evidence behind this claim, but I don't know if it's the most evidence possible or if there's something else that has more evidence.
Yeah,
I just
I don't
wondered,
think it's
just wondered what
it's
y'all
an
thought.
either or. That if I can quote rebut anything, it's the notion that gender is entirely determined by neurochemicals. I mean, first of all, I'm just going to dismiss out of hand the idea that something is insignificant because it, quote, only happens in the brain. I mean, math only happens in the brain. Like the
I didn't.
idea of like national sovereignty, the United States of America is just a imaginary construct that we all somehow hold in our brains, even though none of us can
I
touch
said
it.
it was
So
insignificant. That was me misspeaking. Sorry.
yeah, and I don't, and I'm certainly not meaning to tear you down. I didn't mean to suggest that you had, but it's a thought, right? That
Mhm.
that somehow our gender ideas are silly because they were trying to like override some hardwired fundamental aspect of our identity. But anyway, to try and address the question, I would say that, yeah, there are significant biological underpinnings to gender. We talked to student Dr. Ben about this idea. We've talked to a number of different people from all kinds of disciplines about the genetics, the hormones, the like underlying biological mechanisms
Mhm.
of gender, and they're real and they matter, but they are not a complete picture for a lot of reasons. I mean, it is kind of silly in this day and age when we are still having questions about nature versus nurture, and this
Mhm.
idea that our bodies are one way but our brains are different, or our culture is different. It's all working together. all of these things are constantly working in tandem. The environment that we are in, the ideas that we are introduced to are going to have meaningful impacts, not just on the way that we interpret the chemical transmitters and the things going on inside of our bodies, but also the way that those processes operate. There is such a lack of concordance genetically in these things. What we see in the petri dish and what we understand when we like sequence somebody's genome is not going to account for everything. There's so much that comes from the culture that we live in, and that's why when we look when we look at different societies across Earth and across history, we see so many different understandings of gender. If this was all
Mhm.
purely hardwired, you would think that we would all more or less come to the same conclusions, and that's very much not the case across time and history. But I'm going on when I know that both of you folks have a lot of interesting ideas on this. So what comes to mind, Laura and Kara?
Yeah, so I would love to follow on with what you were saying, Christy, about how you really can't draw this bright line between this is biology and this is culture or society. They are always going to be interacting, and like you mentioned, if it were hardwired, then why are we having this conversation? And that's kind of what I go back to whenever people try to say, well, gender is immutable. It's exactly the same as your biological sex, and biology
Oh,
says so, and that's it, and that's all.
no,
And
no,
if
no.
that were the case, then no one would be deviating from
Sorry,
that. Right?
that's
um
real quickly. Can I say something?
Sure,
yes,
yeah.
That's not
please.
what me or the video is saying. It's saying basically, sorry, I should have described it better. That, like, for example, a trans woman's, he mentioned certain, the actual chemical name, but I can't remember it right now. Basically, that they line up with a cis woman much more than they would line up with a cis man for a trans woman. So basically, that it's not one to one. You can still be trans. He's not a transphobe, but yeah.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Oh, sorry,
Yeah,
go ahead, Laura.
and
Did I
no, that
talk over
there
you?
are studies that indicate that if we could totally isolate and identify the quote gender parts of your brain or of your genetics, then yeah, we would see that concordance in the places where we are able to look at brains and understand what's going on, quote, gender wise. We see a lot of that kind of concordance. And I'll go ahead and tell you, Jacob, I have documented that pretty well on my website, and I can make sure to post some links on the Secular Sexuality Facebook fan group about this topic because it's something we've addressed on this show in detail before. But to just draw a line underneath it, I think it's important to remember that even as we start to study and explore these things and we start to understand, well, where is gender coming from and why, that we not get to this place where we say, oh, well, because I can see it in the scan, or oh, because it shows up in this test tube, now I validate your experience, or now I agree with, quote, how you feel about your gender. We need to couch all of this in a philosophy of validating people's identities, of recognizing that people are who they say that they are, and that it is their right to have the body and the experience that they have. I know you're not advocating against any of that, Jacob, but I just wanted to make sure to undergird this entire conversation in a curiosity that isn't prescriptive, right? That none of us get to sit here and say, well, because we understand that gender is this under a microscope, that everybody needs to work within or operate with those specific ideas.
Yeah, and I want to recommend another article too, Christy, that
Hmm.
kind of speaks to that same thing. This idea that we kind of all agree, okay, nature versus nurture. That's sort of a false dichotomy. They're both going to be involved, but also we tend to kind of forget sometimes that even when we're doing the hard sciences and we're looking in a microscope, we're looking through our own kind of gendered perspectives and experiences, and maybe bringing biases to that, that we are not aware of. And there's a really interesting article that I love by Emily Martin called "The Egg and the Sperm: How Science Has Constructed a Romance Based on Stereotypical Male-Female Roles." And it's really interesting. It's an older article. This is from the 90s, but kind of the points that she makes in it are that, even when we're talking about, what is biology as compared to what is culture, we're talking about biology within the culture that we live in through the lens and the biases that we brought to it. And she kind of makes points like, okay, think about when you learned in sex ed or basic biology about a sperm fertilizing an egg. Why is it the case that we always describe the egg as the passive recipient of the sperm, rather than, you always have this kind of story about there's this horde of sperms that are, competing and racing against one another to see who can get to the egg first. And we're kind of giving them this sort of masculine, athletic sort of, warrior style
Yeah,
of
we think of it like
description.
survival of the fittest. Like the fittest
Yeah.
sperm is the one that will end up impregnating the egg.
Yeah.
I think
And
you're
the
about to
egg
tell
is
us, Kara,
just
that's not the
sitting there.
case.
That's not the case. The egg actually participates in, absorbing the sperm
Selecting.
and
Mhm.
selecting, yes. But we've kind of accidentally probably overlaid these gendered stereotypes about men and women on top of the sperm and the egg, and it sneaks in there. And now we think we're learning science and biology, but we're also learning about the way that we as a society tends to think about and describe men and women. So it kind of all gets mixed up together. And there's several other examples like that in there. I just think it's a really fun read if you're interested in that kind of thing,
Mhm.
to step back and say, hey, you know what? Maybe I need to take several steps back and think about all of the assumptions that might have come into what I know about this. And it sounds like that's something that you're kind of talking about too, with the whole neurochemical stuff, which I haven't read
Yeah,
either,
that's
but
Yeah,
it
and
sounds
I'll
really
make
interesting.
sure
interesting.
to
I
have
pulled up
that
an
article
article.
available to everybody again in the Facebook fan group. But Jacob, how is any of this resonating for you? How are we answering or not answering that central question?
That was helpful. I have that article pulled up, and I'll read that. So thank you. I do have another quick question, if that's good, if it's all right.
Sure.
Yeah, walk us through it.
So basically, Laura mentioned it earlier, and I'm sure you guys might be tired of hearing it, or maybe not. I don't know. But what do you all think the differences between bisexual and pansexual is? Because I'm not sure what to call myself. Or is there a difference? Are they the same term?
So
I think
I
we
would
did an
love.
entire episode on this topic at one point. I wonder if I can't
Oh, did
pull
you?
that
Okay.
up. But in the meantime, yeah, Laura, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I would love to take a stab at this because this is something that I'm just learning. I didn't even identify with the label pan until I took an anthropology class on sex and gender. And one thing that's really, really, really important to understand is that words are descriptive, not prescriptive, and that especially in terms of the LGBTQ community and sexuality and gender, that a lot of these terms are new and being tossed around and played with. And so there's a lot of argument. Like when I started identifying with pan, I didn't even realize that I could be offending people who identify simply as bi because it suggests that if you're a bi person, you may not be attracted to trans men or trans women, which may or may not be the case. And so a lot of bi people were getting somewhat offended that, well, that's already covered under the bi umbrella. So they can be interchangeable depending on who you ask, and they can be both used together depending on who you ask. But it's really like it's actually kind of vehemently debated in a lot of the LGBT circles that I have a lot of online discussions with.
Hmm.
Oh, and so one thing that I've found that helps me in terms of bi versus pan is bi. The way that it was described to me that I thought was the most pleasing was you're attracted to your own gender and other genders, and so that covers like anything and everything, right? Whereas pansexual is more I'm attracted to people regardless of their genitals. Like the genitals are not the most important thing in terms of attraction. And now those are the definitions that I've personally adopted because I like them. But if
Mm.
you ask another bi person or another pan person or bi pan person, you're going to get different answers depending on their understanding. Like all of this is just so new and rapidly evolving. But I would love to hear Christy and Kara's thoughts on this.
Yeah, I'll suppose I'll just jump in very quickly and say that the crux of the conversation we had in the past was really came down to who are we talking to? You know, if
Hmm.
we imagine that these words don't matter except for their capacity to transmit a idea, in this case, that idea is your sexual orientation to another person, then what is the easiest, simplest series of just mouth sounds that you can create? Like, how do you push air out of your diaphragm in such a way as to communicate a idea from one brain to another? And that's going to depend a little bit on who you're talking to, because if you are trying to describe your sexuality to your grandmother, her
Hmm.
notion of bisexuality is probably going to be different than some of the definitions that Laura just gave. So,
Right.
in many, many, many cases, people who identify as pansexual will sort of shorten it to bi as a way of just fitting into a paradigm that other people can understand. And sure, we can have really complex discussions about how that may lead to erasure or misunderstanding, but the sad, unfortunate reality is that we all have to exist in this very messy, undereducated world that we've created for ourselves. And this language around our sexual orientation is very new, and we're not very good at it yet. Just as a human
Right.
species, we are underdeveloped in our technological ability to use language to discuss sexuality. And that's something we're all going to have to cope with. So ultimately, Jacob, I would say that whatever word you use may change year to year, may change conversation to conversation or person you're talking to. And you don't need to get overly hung up on it, even as
Right.
you're trying to operate, respectfully and mindfully.
One thing I would add is don't be afraid to, or be ready to give a little bit of context or explanation. Like if you say, "Oh, I'm bisexual," and someone was like, "What does that mean?" Be willing to kind of open up and have that bigger discussion because we all want to describe things in ways that are pithy and that communicate the most amount of information in as few words as possible. But when you have all these nuances, that's not always possible. So sometimes it is going to take a little bit of maybe uncomfortable misunderstandings or a little bit of additional, context or explanation. So, I don't know. I don't know if that helps or not, but
Yeah, okay. Thank y'all.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Thanks. Was
Yeah,
that it?
I think that's good for me. So have a good night, guys.
I
Okay, great.
appreciate
Thanks
you.
so much for
sure.
Take
calling,
care.
Jacob. Have a
Bye.
good one. Bye. Okay, well, that was an interesting call. I'm glad he called in. So, let's quickly shift gears after that fantastic call and take a look at what else is going on around the ACA.
When is the right time to bring up that I'm bisexual?
For me, definitely not a first date thing, but a before you thing. And then if it's a problem for them, I'd be like, okay, well, I hope you enjoyed your chicken parmesan and have a nice night.
Yeah, I understand. I need to have empathy, right? I need to have compassion for others because that's what Jesus wants. But I can't accept your marriage as legitimate, or I can't accept that you're having sexual relations with this person is also legitimate. It's like there's terms and conditions to your compassion.
Well, the 19th century, I'm going to do this in a particular voice. The 19th century is a strange time. Science was coming into its own. Religious people were starting to realize that perhaps the Bible may not be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
If I had a vision of, I don't know, Jesus, some really, really white guy with blonde hair, and this Jesus comes and says to me, come and take my hand, my son, I would think, oh no, someone slipped some drugs into my yerba mate.
Let's go, Jim. He, him, in Idaho. What's your proof of God?
It's in the Bible and it says so.
Okay. You got us, buddy. You got us.
He was up for like 30 minutes for that. All right. Well, the big question for me on all of this stuff is it kind of comes down to like, all right, why do we do this? We've been talking about maybe the impact that we're hoping to make, But there's a lot of work that goes into this volunteering and to creating a show like this. Not just the folks that everybody sees here having this conversation, but all of the incredible crew that we show at the end of the show, the folks that are working behind those scenes, the folks that are donating and participating in the organization. I mean, there's a lot of effort and energy that goes into what we put out into the world. And so I'm curious for y'all how you got interested in participating in that work. I mean, putting that volunteerism, putting that effort into a project like this. Laura, how did you, for one, get started?
So how I got started in activism in general is different than how I got started in activism with atheist activism. But
Yeah.
I think that's where we're going, and that is probably where I'll start. Unless you want me to go way back to my teenage years. But I honestly, like, when I started digesting a lot of more science-based YouTube channels, and then they started like sort of migrating on the, the suggested video list, started getting further and further away from strictly science-based videos into more commentary and debates and stuff like that. Eventually I stumbled upon videos that the ACA produced, and I just kind of got hooked.
Hmm.
And I listened like avidly to pretty much every show. And I know you guys remember me before I even became a face on the ACA. I was the one in like the Sexuality chat, like just chatting it up. And so it was just something that really caught my attention and I was passionate about. But what got me started was listening to what people had to say and realizing that I had something to say too. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that a lot of you listeners out there are probably just like this, where you're like, oh, I would have said this, or if you'd only just put it that way, or if I was on, here's how I would have explained it. Or wow, they explained it perfectly, but here's like a different way. And so for me, it was just a matter of, you know, I have the intelligence, I have the voice, I have the articulation. I could do this and I want to. Like, I want to say something about this because I'm passionate about it.
Sure.
So, yeah, I mean, putting it that way, it can sound kind of selfish, and it was, right? But ultimately, the goal is to get as many voices out there as possible and to get some of this stuff heard and discussed and talked about. So even though it might be my selfish desire to just, get my 2 cents out there, I think it ends up helping in the sense that more people are talking about it, more voices are being heard, and I'm able to share whatever little nuggets of information I have, good or bad, with the rest of the world and keep the conversation going and flowing.
Yeah, no, and I'd like to stress that this is not just a convenient talking point for a volunteer organization looking for volunteers,
Right.
but I have frequently heard Dr. Daryl Ray, who founded this show, and Kara, we're going to hear a little bit about your story. I'm sure that's a name that may come up, but he talks often about maybe the necessity of volunteering for living like a happy, healthy, fulfilled life, and I would sincerely challenge folks listening to recognize that, whether it's with the ACA or has anything to do with YouTube or sex or atheism or whatever else, that if there is not some part of your life where you are working towards something better and bigger for the world at large, it's not just that the world is missing out on that labor. It's not just that you like owe 10% tithe to your community or anything quite like that, but it's meaningfully important, I think, in feeling connected to your world and feeling effective or hopeful about the world. And I think there's a lot of personal value that maybe can get overlooked. But Kara, tell us a little bit about how you got headed in this direction.
Yeah, you pretty much summed it up there, Christy. Totally agree on all of those points. It is kind of as you describe. I actually got started with activism, if you will, while I was in grad school.
Mm,
I was doing my PhD in anthropology at the time, and I have always found education, in and of itself, education for education's sake, to be fulfilling and
sure.
interesting to me. And I think some of that comes from, in the background that I grew up in, science in particular, but, learning in general, if it's not about the Bible, is frowned upon. And that was not consistent with, my personality, I guess. I'm curious and want to know things and ask the questions and poke the bear and, be a irritating little snot sometimes, I guess. So that was, I'm sure, very upsetting for some of my teachers when I was younger, but I had a genuine interest in learning, and I found, education to be very fulfilling. But by the time I got to grad school, I was getting pretty burned out because I was doing nothing but grad school, and
Hmm.
working, and you're doing research and you're reading and you're going to seminars and you're, maybe you're working in a lab, maybe you're being a teaching assistant, like, and it's just, it consumes your whole life. And I got to the point where I wasn't having time to do things to take care of myself. I wasn't exercising like I usually do. I wasn't reading for pleasure anymore. I actually, for a period of time, didn't like reading because I was always reading, for assignments. And that's
Sure.
not me. I
Yeah.
love reading. So anyway, all this was going on when the pandemic hit. And all of a sudden, we were kind of forced to take a break from the things we had been doing. And that was probably the best thing that could have happened to me, was to go into lockdown and have to, kind of have a shift in what I was doing. And it was during that time that I got involved in, as you mentioned, Dr. Daryl Ray's program, Recovering from Religion. And they were doing a Monday night show called RFRX, which we still do every Monday night. Tune in. And I started going to that just to kind of, as you said, kind of build some community. I was lonely. We're all cooped up in the house trying to find Zoom meetings to join, in early 2020. And I found that one. And I really connected immediately with it, being a place where people could have a community around accepting that, hey, we may have all had a bad experience with religion. Some people didn't, and that's fine. But, it was a place where people could come together and just feel comfortable talking about the fact that they don't believe in the previous religion that they believed in before, and, working through issues surrounding that. And it was just a safe place to have those conversations. And so I started getting more and more involved in that and volunteering there. And then sometimes I would host the show, and it kind of grew and snowballed from there. And then I got involved with Secular Sexuality as well. And it's one of those things now where, like, I think we were talking about this earlier, Christy, it takes up a lot of your time, to the point where sometimes I'm thinking to myself, wow, I'm spending almost as much time on all of this activism as I am on, my regular job. But it's so much more fulfilling.
Mm-hmm.
It's so much different from, doing purely academic work, which there's nothing wrong with that. I come on here and recommend people's books and articles and research all the time. But to me, it feels very different to be writing an academic paper about something as compared to actually engaging with real people in real time. I feel like there's a disconnect there for a lot of people, where you can get so sort of lost in your ivory tower that you forget what you're doing, even if you're writing about social issues, and it's important to you to talk about diversity and equality and inclusion. But to me, I felt like, well, I'm not doing any of those things. I was just reading and writing about them. I want to actually do them. And so being able to volunteer and just talk to people and help build those communities, to me, has felt tremendously more impactful and fulfilling just as a person. So I'm going to keep doing that, I guess.
Yeah.
I
Well,
love
and
it.
then Carol, I'll stay with you. Like, why secular sexuality? There are so many worthy causes, so many opportunities to get involved. I mean, there's just so much need in this world. Why spend your time with us talking about these particular issues? Actually, Laura, let me turn that to you. Why SecX?
Just kidding, Cara. No. Um,
Sorry, I think
so
I froze. Am I back?
no,
Yeah,
that's
lost
okay.
you for
Yeah.
just a moment.
Sorry about that. Not sure what happened.
That's
You were asking me a question, Christy, but did y'all move on from
Yeah,
that?
no, I wanted to hear from Laura just about why secular
Yeah.
sexuality in particular.
so, and it's interesting because this is my favorite of all the ACA shows, and the one that it's like my sort of like my little baby, right? And I think it has to do with the fact that I mean, everything is important, and there's a lot of really controversial social topics that need to be included and and talked about and pushed. But when it comes to sexuality and gender and relationship roles, I think it ruins a lot of people's lives. There's a lot of tension. There's a lot that people don't know about it. There's a lot of ways in which we're living because we feel like we have to live that way or because we're
Mm,
supposed to, when
sure.
that's not even true or not even the case. And so with my sort of adventure through two different religions and how it impacted not just my sexuality but also my concepts of gender, my concept of who I was and versus who I should be, um it it's very destructive. And I think that there really needs to be a strong counter message out there. And trust me, it's not all about the O's. The O's are great, but it's not all about like, oh, I'm just in this because sex is awesome and I want to just tell everybody that sex is awesome. It is, but it almost has nothing to do with that. It has to do with how dysfunctional our society is as it approaches sex, gender, relationships, roles, and all that stuff. And I think secular sexuality gets into so many different topics and it touches on so many different things. I mean, it demystifies sex work, demystifies different gender roles and all that kind of stuff. Like everything that you can think of, demystifies different kinds of kinks. And it shows people the humanity behind it all
Mm-hmm.
and the realism of it and not this really sort of like evil, devilish, terrible sexual deviant side that a lot of the narrative shows, like the Christian narrative and even just our cultural narrative, because it really has bled into our culture. Like even outside of religion, our culture really does carry that narrative with it.
Oh, no question.
And yeah, yeah. So for me, it was really about getting more voices out there that are willing to talk about these things in a way that it's not salacious, it's not taboo, it's just okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so Kara, same question to you, I suppose. You were talking about just how much of your time is being taken up. Why silo some of it off for these particular issues?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think Laura really touched on the answer for me too, which is just that it's it's such an expansive topic. When we're talking about sex and gender and all of the issues surrounding it, we're talking about a lot of the big conversations about just what it is to be human and all of the issues that, we kind of swim around in society, social issues, all of that. And it's kind of fun. Like it's a little bit taboo and it's fun to do that. I'm not going to lie. That's part of the appeal. But I think it is important because it's a way of like you said, demystifying some of those things and taking away some of the stigma and some of the shame that people might feel around those, and actually making it, something that people can talk about that can really enrich their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Like getting rid of some of these bad ideas and tropes that I learned as a child. I mean, the sooner
Yeah.
you can get out from under those, the sooner you're going to have a more fulfilling life. So I don't want other people to miss out.
Yeah,
Right.
no doubt. I mean, I'll definitely say for myself that I owe, right? Like I
Oh.
was rescued
Oh,
from a very bland, very quiet, very unfulfilling
yeah.
sexuality, and that sexuality made so much of life bland and unfulfilling. And it was a lot of podcasts like this one that meaningfully helped pull me from that by just sort of normalizing these conversations, providing a little bit of information, and these sorts of things. So I feel very much dedicated to offering, like you said, Kara, some of that academic expertise that I carry as a sex counselor. Just hoping to make the world a slightly better place on some of these issues because there's a need to right now, right? Like for much of the first quarter of this year, through this show I would get to talk to lawyers and journalists and these different types of activists and all of these different experts, and I would ask sex workers and all these different folks about sort of like the direction of the world. Does it feel like this issue is getting better? Does it feel like these things could really go to the worst possible case scenario? And I just heard over and over from people these like really diabolical predictions. And to be quite frank about it, many of them have come true in the last several months. So
Yeah.
with all of that said, how does like the state or the direction of the world influence how you feel about some of this work?
Okay. Yeah. There's a lot going on right now.
Yeah,
And
yeah. I
not
mean, when you look at the news, does that motivate you to do a show like this? I can completely acknowledge that it often is demotivating for me. Like, it'll take the wind out of your sails to see what's happening in the news and to want to do this kind of work.
See, that's interesting. I totally get that. Seeing some of those news stories is, very devastating in some cases for me as well. And I do get cynical about, you know, humans are terrible. I hate them all, but that's not really true. It's not my professional opinion, but it is demoralizing sometimes. But also, I can't remember who it was that was talking about this previously. It may have been on one of these shows actually, but they were kind of making the point that when we see these political decisions being made and things happening in the news and people being violent and things like that, one way to look at that is that it's kind of like this sort of panicked, dying, last gasp of sort of this older way of thinking about sexuality and this last attempt to try and wrest control away from the rest of society that is not going in that direction. We've had recently in the last couple of decades we've legalized gay marriage. We made contraception more available and all of these things. We talk more openly. We have shows like this. Kids these days have have a lot better access to information than we did when we were younger, and I think that scares a lot of people to see the world going that way. And so we're seeing these backlashes against it. And to me, it's been helpful to kind of think of it in that context. It's not that we're losing, it's that they're losing and they're having a fit about it. And so that means our work is doing something. We're having an impact. We're scaring the people that, don't want to be nice to the other humans. And to me, that means that we are making an impact. And so if we can keep doing that, we're going to keep moving forward. There's some bumps in the road happening right now, but I want to be optimistic that that's what they are and that we're going to move past them and it's going to get better. But
yeah, so there's a sense for you of participating in the victory, like of getting that much closer to making some version of the world or some piece of the world a better place.
Yes, exactly. We're moving it in that direction, and it's when it upsets people that shows that they're hearing it and they're seeing it and the change is happening, and that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I tend to agree 100% with you that is where it feels like it's going. But then I also want to not push back, but maybe add in addition to that it almost doesn't matter, because whether their outward vehementance, like the increased social activism that's going on against some of these advances in human rights, right? Whether it's just their death cries or whether they really are pulling ahead and winning, I think one way or another our voices are super, super important. But I like that you put it that way, because that's more inspiring and it feels better. When you feel like you're fighting a losing battle, it can be very, very disheartening. And I don't know, I can feel like sometimes I don't even want to listen to the news. I don't even watch the news. When I heard about the Roe versus Wade thing, I just wanted to bury my head and be like, let's not talk about it. Let's not read any articles about it. I just need like a week to just not make that like an obsession of my life, right? Because it's hard sometimes. But I would disagree with Christy though, because that's kind of what gets me fired up. Like if I didn't have all this negative news, or like if I didn't think that the message still needed to get out there, I don't think I'd be nearly as passionate about getting out and talking about it. Like
bulletin board material, right? Like it gets you revved up to want to fix the problem.
Yes, I'm definitely like I've been called like a mother bear or like I get really like up on my pedestal and I fight for people and I get really fired up when injustices are done. And I tend to want to stand up for people almost sometimes in ways that are bad and destructive. But I think if I thought that everything was peachy and good, I don't think I'd even want like if everybody thought the way that we did, we wouldn't even need our voices, right? Like it doesn't even need to be said, right? Like nobody's arguing that the color purple is purple, right? Because we all kind of agree to it, right? So
but how do we know that what looks like purple to you looks like purple to me?
All right, we only have 15-20 more minutes left in this show. We're not doing solipsism.
Fine.
Yeah, Yeah, it is fair to say that that whatever motivates people, wherever we are on some arbitrary grand narrative of human history, the fact is,
Mhm.
like, we're alive now. What do
Yeah.
we need to do now? And is this
Mhm.
part of it? So I definitely get that. And I suppose on the one hand, if it motivates you to feel like the world is burning and you're somebody with a bucket of water, then yeah, go out and splash that bucket around. If it feels to you like the world is just a beautiful garden and you're here to water some of the flowers in it, God bless you. I wish I had that sort of mindset, because I do
Right.
appreciate that notion of feeling like we are not just like bailing water out of a ship, but that we're actually doing something
Yeah.
beautiful in that way.
Mhm. Yeah,
Very well said.
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, from here though, I mean, there's so much to be done. There's so much work that still remains. What do
Mhm.
y'all maybe hope or aspire to see in the next couple of years? I mean, we don't have to get into like prognosticating about particular elections or anything quite like that. But Laura, let me start with you. Is there anything that you are maybe hopeful as a ambition or a intention for the world at large as we continue to hopefully become a more sex positive, more accepting world?
Yeah, I think because I do see us trending in a generally positive direction, my hope is really that that just kind of continues because like a steam train, right? We'll pick up more and more steam, and as long as nobody is getting too disheartened and we don't have massive amounts of people dropping out of the social activism pool, I really and just people living their genuine lives and not feeling like they need to hide themselves. Like that alone is a form of activism, even though it may seem kind of arbitrary. It's huge. And so as long as we continue to empower people to do that, and as long as there's still voices out there, I tend to think it's trending toward the better. And I do see things now that are better now today than they were when I was a child, 20
Mhm.
years ago. So I think that um if I have a hope, it's really that the steam sort of picks up, that it doesn't keep going at such a slow roll, like two steps backward, one step forward, three steps forward, five steps backward. Like I really kind of hope that that what's happening today will open enough people's eyes to the fact that they have to be participants in the political process and they have to be
Mm,
verbal about who they are and what they want. Otherwise, it's the vocal minority that's really going to take charge and take control because the rest of us are like, "Oh, my vote doesn't count." Right? So if I have one hope, it's that enough people are inspired by this really kind of horrible divide that we have
sure.
in our country. Especially like keeping it real on sexuality. We have a divide just on sexual related topics. If we can just keep it to where more people are empowered and inspired to get out there and use their voice and to vote, that I think would pick up the steam a little bit faster.
Yeah, yeah, no, fair to say. I don't mean for this to be too much of a call out, but I had drinks with a handful of great people from this community, from this organization, people that
Mhm.
you, dear viewer, have like heard from and seen on camera. And as we were talking about, the efforts that we put into making the world a better place and the energy and the volunteering and all of this, I mentioned that there was like a local election coming up, and it seemed to be
Mhm.
news to a lot of the people at the
Oh,
table.
no.
It's important to remember that like we don't just do this to talk. Like we want to actually do something, and voting is a huge part of doing something. Yes, there is a lot to be said about the American two-party system. There is a lot
Mm,
of good reason to feel frustrated and disenfranchised,
yeah.
but your vote really can matter. Please, just goddamn do it. But Kara, the same question that I gave Laura. I mean, what are you maybe rooting for? What is the storyline or the hope that you have for the next couple of years of sex positivity?
Oh man. Yeah, I hope that it continues to become, more mainstream and, kind of to get back, to your point about the politics of it again, I think we're hearing a lot of backlash right now of people arguing against, everything, whether it's
Mhm.
abortion or trans women in sports or contraception or, people being, out about whatever, kink or orientation that they have. We're having so much backlash against the positivity. But I think that if we keep pushing and making it more normal, that we'll just, the world will be a safer place for everyone if we can get past this, angry kind of moralizing backlash against people just living their lives. And,
Mhm.
back to your point again about, yeah, it is politics. I think a lot of times people kind of frame these issues as moral and religious issues. And yes, there is a religious component to it for sure.
Hmm.
But I'm thinking about like Michel Foucault's book, The History of Sexuality, which,
Mhm.
he can be tough to read, but you know, he sort of goes over this sort of genealogy of how we've talked about sex, and all it is power relations. It's a way of controlling people through discourse, through what they're allowed to say, what they're not allowed to say, who's forced to
Mhm.
say what, what are we interested in examining in people's lives and tell them they can and can't do. And it's not about sex, it's about power. And he kind of makes the point that you need to realize that that's what's happening, that a lot of these things are social constructs and you're being made to feel and speak and act certain ways that are purportedly moral or normal or scientific, when in fact this is about controlling people and controlling their bodies in particular. It kind of gets into this discourse on biopower and how the point of government has recently become, and I'm describing Foucault, not saying my own politics, but
Sure.
I'm saying the point of government has basically become to turn people into baby making machines.
Mhm.
Increase the population, make it productive. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying that that's necessarily the whole picture, but I think that is a part of the picture. And realizing, hey, there's more to my life than being a baby making machine, is a good step forward.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. And there have been so many takes around the Roe decision, and I don't necessarily know that we need to pretend to have a unique perspective on any of that. But it is just worth taking a moment to reiterate that this is clearly not a issue of how do we protect children, right? There's so much that goes into the politics of that kind of thing, and we need to recognize that and play the game. We
Mhm.
need to be as dedicated to protecting the bodily autonomy of all people, but in particular people who can become pregnant.
Mhm.
And we need to have the same level of like fervor that the folks who actively campaigned against that for 50 years had. Coming from the evangelical church, it was constantly a topic of conversation, uh, overturning Roe. And so now that it's finally happened, I think that we need to be not just voting, not just volunteering, but be engaged in this huge and important process.
100%. I could not agree more. It's the same. I grew up in a similar background to you, and I still have family members that will talk about this. This is, the only thing that goes on their Facebook page. This is, just a part of their daily life, and they are fired up about it. And if they're attending church or something like that, they may be going every week and hearing from their spiritual leader how this is the number one thing that they need to be involved in. And, they're going out and getting involved. And they're a minority, but if they're more involved, then that's who's going to make the change and make it be the way they want. So yeah, I,
Mhm.
I completely agree that we have the numbers to make the world a better place and a safer place for everyone, but we have to make it important to go out and do
Yes.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
let
need the
sex and gender
passion.
be
Yeah.
important in your
Yes.
Yes.
in the voting booth,
Yeah.
with your wallet, with all of these other aspects of your life. But I didn't mean to go into any of this in order to give folks the hard sell, but I think that we have to wrap up this conversation on some level by talking about how people listening can get off the sidelines, maybe if that's where you're at in your life, and join this fight. So where can people listening to this get involved with either, secular sexuality or with the ACA? I mean, where should we point people?
The cool thing is there's just so many different avenues to connect with the ACA, including just starting out in chat, right? And getting to
Hmm.
know a few people and getting comfortable and stuff like that. Um, but where I started really getting involved in making connections was on the Facebook pages for all the different shows. And then you kind of pick your favorite or you pick your passion and you kind of go from there. But then the other thing that helped me to really start getting involved, like to actually connect with the ACA, was just because I'm old fashioned this way, was just their Facebook page, the atheist-community.org. Because I'm one of those, if I need to know something, go straight to Google and start asking a million questions. And that's kind of where I got connected. Um, so yeah, I mean, the easiest way to start is just to start having the conversations. You don't have to get in there and like know everything and be like the volunteer of the year and get involved in absolutely every piece of the pie. Like it can just start with interacting in a social group, right? Like either on Facebook or in our chat or whatever. And then it can go to, well, here's what I can do to volunteer an hour a week or 2 hours a
Hmm.
week or whatever. But there's tons and tons of different ways to connect, but those are the 2 that really resonated with me, and that's how I got connected in with the ACA.
Yeah, no, I like the way you framed it, because I do want to encourage people to go to not just feel like they need to rush to volunteer, but to maybe go from like audience member to community member, and then maybe to becoming like putting a ring on it and becoming a member of the organization. You can go to atheist-community.org and become a dues-paying voting member of the organization in order to have a say in how this
Mhm.
specific organization is run. And I highly encourage people to do that. And then, from there, perhaps you do want to jump into volunteering. And one place to do that would just be to email us, tv @atheist-community.org. You can also find that email address and other information on the main website. But Kara, is there anything else that you might add about that process?
Yeah, I think you guys covered most of the good ways to do it. I'm also old fashioned, so I mean if it's Facebook or just googling the website, that's usually how I'm going to get there. I know there's other ways to socially engage with us too, but those are definitely the ways I would pick. But don't forget also to talk to other people about it. I think we talk about this all the time, that people think, I'm the only person I know that's watching this show or that thinks this way or that doesn't believe or that whatever it is. But if you start talking to people about it and sharing with them, hey, I found this cool show on YouTube, I thought this was interesting, what do you think? You're not only spreading that out to other people who may benefit from it, but also you may realize that there are more people in your life that have similar views and interests, that they
Yeah.
might not have mentioned it to you because they didn't know how you were going to respond. With everything being so polarized, as it is, it can be scary to have those conversations. So I would say, if you feel safe, in the relationship, obviously don't put yourself in danger, but talk to people about it. It doesn't have to just be online. You can talk to people in real life too and share links and, and things and
Talk
ideas out
about
loud.
sex. Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. Uh,
Yeah.
well, Laura, before Kara takes us out and wraps everything up for the night, are there any other tips that you might recommend for folks who, maybe SecX or the ACA is not where they want to be or what they're going to volunteer for? Can you say anything about how folks who just want to contribute to a more sex positive world can actively engage in that?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Conversation and not being afraid to have the conversation is huge. And that sounds somewhat like tongue in cheek, like, well, yeah, duh. But um having opportunities to actually be a little bit more open, even to the point of a little bit of discomfort, like maybe not disrespect, but
Sure.
certainly it's okay to get a little bit uncomfortable in your conversations and try to open up a little bit and test the waters. But the other things are to find your specific passions, and we're talking specifically about sex positivity. So what is it? Like what is your specific passion in regards to your gender, your sexuality, your relationships, your roles in life, and start seeking out ways of having conversations with those communities, because even if you don't want to actively volunteer, or even if you can't, like I'm going to assume that like a lot of people just can't, right?
Sure.
There's still ways to interact. get your voice out there, to be a positive voice. And one way that I would only recommend if you're comfortable, and only recommend, like Kara said, if you're safe, is to not be afraid to push back a little bit in situations where you feel like you can. So if you have that Christian grandmother that is like, well, marriage is only between a man and a woman, and you feel like you can handle this without any sort of horrible negative fallout, don't be afraid to push back and say, well, actually, that's not what I believe. I believe differently. And to be able to have that peaceful and respectful conversation about why and what the implications are, and kind of breaking it down. Because I've noticed that when you give people a human face to the things that they think are evil, bad, demonic, and when you start to show them how it's actually normal and regular and human, and they start to see another side to it, even if you don't change their mind, you're at least presenting them with information that counters their narrative. So it's one more drop in the puddle that maybe a year or 2 or 3 from now they hear enough of this positive reinforcement that it starts to bring them around. And if anything, it's good practice to just learn how to have the conversations in a respectful way that disagrees with that narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that, Laura. And that kind of reminds me too, for a lot of people, myself included, we may have had some pretty traumatic conversations with people that we care about along those lines. And if that describes anybody here, I'm also going to recommend Recovering from Religion, which you can find us at recoveringfromreligion.org. We also have a community on there where you can kind of get involved with other people who maybe, working through some of those issues. And it's a very sex positive place as well. But also we have a lot of, like, our Monday night shows. A lot of times we talk about issues like, how do I have these conversations with people, that disagree with me? Or what do I do with these relationships where I need help setting a boundary, or I need a better way to communicate? And so if you're looking for tips and tricks and, just another community of like-minded people as well, if you may have had some bad religious experiences in the past, and you're working through that, don't forget about Recovering from Religion too. So you can do both. You don't have to be just pick one thing. Go out and get involved with what's working for you.
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah. Okay. Well, I suppose we should tell people all of the other ways that they can keep up with what's happening with the ACA. What do you think?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, just to kind of reiterate what we just talked about, as we mention every time, don't forget to check us out on our website at atheist-community.org. Or you can email the show with sex at atheist-community.org, or email the ACA with TV at atheist-community.org. And don't forget also our one-stop shop where you can catch up on all of the audio versions of this show. tiny.cc/AEN podcasts is where you can find all of those for all of the shows. And then, like we mentioned a few minutes ago, there's also the Facebook groups. We have the Secular Sexuality fan group on Facebook. Definitely check that out. I think we're all on there. You may see us. And also we have Discord, tiny.cc/ACD Discord, where you can find another community of lively, interactive folks to get involved with. And finally, tiny.cc/merch ACA. I have to say that real slow because I always get it mixed up. It's where you can find all of the really cool merch that you can wear or drink coffee out of, or whatever else. We have all sorts of fun stuff where you can buy and, show off your support for the show, and also maybe start a conversation with other people if they see your cool merch, and then they might want some too. So check that out too if you're interested. And then last but definitely not least, we want to give a shout out to our fantastic and amazing crew. Can we bring on the crew cam and see the folks who make it all possible? Thank you so much. Y'all keep everything running in the background. There's no way this would happen without our amazing crew, and which is another good way to volunteer.
Yeah. So many different ways to volunteer. And I guess I really want to make sure that we don't leave anybody with the impression that they are being lazy, or that they need to, get off their butt or anything else. Because I sincerely do believe that what we're preaching here is good health as much as anything else. I sincerely do see, not just in my own life, but reflected in the research on the subject, that there is meaningful value in being willing to invest in your community, to be willing to push for change. With that in mind, are there any final thoughts or impressions that you'd like to leave with the audience tonight? Laura, let me start with you.
So final thoughts for me in terms of I have kind of two. One is the
Mhm.
volunteerism, and really I think that we do have really, really busy lives and it can be really hard, but volunteering does two things. Like it's incredibly fulfilling and it's something that can take your health and well-being and it can improve it as long as you're doing it within a scope that you're passionate about and that you can handle and manage within your schedule. And there's ways that you can do that in so many small little itty bitty ways. Even if it's just contributing money to organizations or even if it's just contributing your voice here and there. So just finding those little itty bitty things or big, huge, ginormous things that you can do that bring you genuine fulfillment, but they really do make a big difference. And then in terms of secular sexuality specifically, like our mission, I think, is critically important to get information out there that is bastardized, that's demonized, that
Mhm.
people sometimes even just know absolutely nothing about because they don't talk about it and
Sure.
nobody else is talking to them about it. So my final, like, kind of thought is, and I know Kara said it earlier, but share our message. Get us out there. Share us on your Facebook pages, your other social medias. Clearly I'm old because I keep saying Facebook. But or so my kids tell me. But there's so many different ways to share our message, and I think it's a message that everybody needs to hear, even if it's not an episode on their particular kink or sexuality. The more it's talked about, the more it's normalized, the better. So
Mhm.
that is one of the hugest ways to get good, positive sex education out there is just to share it.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and Kara, how about yourself? What are those last thoughts?
Yeah, I love that, Laura. I feel like you summed it up. I don't know that I have much more to add other
Sure.
than just, like we talked about earlier, don't let other people steal your joy.
Mm.
I love
Be
that.
you, you're normal, you're not broken, and go talk to other people about that. And also, we kind of didn't really mention this earlier, but I think it goes without saying, that's also part of being, a good ally for people too. When you're being supportive and sex positive, that makes other people feel safer around you too, and that is hugely important, so don't forget about that.
No question. Well, I really appreciate everybody joining us tonight. I hope that a few folks might feel inspired and that we might get to meet you someday. We'd certainly love to have you on our team. But for now, I just want to say to everybody listening, you know, you've earned it. There's no need to feel ashamed of it. So why don't you take a quiet moment to yourself and give yourself a big old orgasm, or better yet, give somebody else one.
Everybody else one.
Watch Talk Heathen live Sundays at 1 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTTH and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callth.